We have very bad elections. We have a bad voting system. We have mail-in ballots. And they're going to lose hundreds of thousands of ballots, maybe purposely or maybe just through incompetence.
Now, if you're wondering how Trump prepared for today's ranting in Michigan about cats, dogs, and geese, well, he ranted on Truth Social about the 2024 election, going as far to threaten prosecution for those he deems to be committing skullduggery. I mean, who taught him that word? Was that you, Laura Loomer? Ending with the words, and I quote, "Please beware that this legal exposure extends to lawyers, political operatives, donors, legal voters, and corrupt election officials. Those involved in unscrupulous behavior will be sought out, caught, and prosecuted at levels, unfortunately, never seen before in our country." Yet Republicans have the unmitigated gall to reprimand Democrats for accurately calling this man a threat to democracy. And while all this was going on, Vice President Kamala Harris continued on her campaign trail, sitting down for an interview with the National Association of Black Journalists.
And then finally, you know, the Association of Black Journalists, two of them work on MSNBC, and the third guy's with NPR. They're all left-leaning. At least Trump was willing to go into the lion's den, you know, and she could have turned people around, but she doesn't have the mental ability to do it. The only thing she could do is pull back to the memorization that she had when she was prepping for the debate with Trump and try to pull those whole sentences out. I don't think she even understands what she's saying.
Voters are better off now than they were 4 years ago.
4 years ago, when we came in during the worst unemployment since the Great Depression. We came in during the worst public health epidemic in centuries. We came in after the worst attack on our democracy since the Civil War. And a lot of it due in large part to the mismanagement by the former president as it relates to COVID and obviously January 6th. And we had then a lot of work to do to clean up a mess. As of today, we have created over 16 million new jobs, over 800,000 new manufacturing jobs. We have the lowest Black unemployment rate in generations. We have invested in small businesses, and they're to the benefit of many people, but including Black small businesses, some of the highest rate of creation of new Black small businesses in years. We have done the work of capping the cost of prescription medication for our seniors for issues like insulin. And again, I'm speaking to the Black journalists who care about all people, but in particular, I'll talk about the impact on Black people, where we know Black folks are 60% more likely to be diagnosed with diabetes. And we have now finally capped the cost of insulin for our seniors at $35 a month, capped the cost of prescription medication for our seniors at $2,000 a year, because we, unlike the former president who promised to do it, we finally have allowed Medicare to negotiate drug prices against the big pharmaceutical companies. And these are just some of the accomplishments. Is the price of groceries still too high? Yes. Do we have more work to do? Yes. And I will tell you, I do believe that I offer a new generation of leadership for our country that is about, in particular, turning the page on an era that sadly has shown us attempts by some to incite fear, to create division in our country.
Now, shredding Trump at an event organized by the same NABJ that Trump bombed in front of just weeks ago, well, that's one thing. But doing it while the event was broadcast live across the Fox News airwaves, man, that is bound to get under that thick orange coat.
Think about the words she's been repeating for the last 3 months. New generation. Turn the page, optimism, ambition, middle-class opportunity. She just strings those buzzwords that have been poll tested together, and then she just runs out the clock in the interview.
When you talk about the kind of numbers that I'm talking about, that, because look, childcare is childcare. There's something, you have to have it. In this country, you have to have it.
Childcare is childcare. You have to have it.
And in stark contrast to her opponent, when pressed for answers, Kamala Harris, well, she gave them for starters, instead of, attacking the moderator and anyone in sight to deflect from the mere concepts of an answer that he usually comes up with.
President, Black men, as you know, are a closely watched voting bloc. You've hosted Black men at your residence.
Yep.
You have engaged Black men and centered them in your economic opportunity tour. But polling shows that some Black men, particularly young Black men, are considering voting for Donald Trump, and they see him as better for the economy. What is your message to young Black male voters who feel left out of this economy, and how can your economic policies materially change their lives?
So I appreciate the spirit of the question, but I'll tell you, I've often been asked this question in a way that I've had to respond by first saying that I think it's very important to not operate from the assumption that Black men are in anybody's pocket. Black men are like any other voting group. You got to earn their vote. So I'm working to earn the vote. Not assuming I'm going to have it because I am Black, but because the policies and the perspectives I have understands what we must do to recognize the needs of all communities. And I intend to be a president for all people. Specifically as it relates to what we need to do, to your point around economic opportunity. Yes, I started way before I was at the top of the ticket and what I called an economic opportunity tour, focused on Black men. Understanding that, for example, we have so many entrepreneurs in the community who do not have access to capital, but they've got great ideas, an incredible work ethic, the ambition, the aspiration, the dream, but don't have the relationships necessarily. So my work has included, as vice president, getting billions more dollars into community banks, including working with the big banks to do that, so that we can increase access to capital for our small businesses, for our startups. Part of my plan under my economic opportunity plan going forward is that right now, startup entrepreneurs, small businesses only get a tax deduction of $5,000. Nobody can start a small business with $5,000. So I'm expanding that to $50,000. Understanding, again, that when people have the opportunity to have the resources to get started, they're going to put the good ideas, they're going to put the hard work into it.
She also did that thing that Fox News continues to claim that she can speak extemporaneously, which is of course absurd and stems from bigotry considering who we're talking about here. This is someone who has been a district attorney in one of the biggest cities in the world for 2 terms, the state attorney general for one of the biggest states in America, a US senator for 4 years, and a vice president of the United States for nearly 4 years. But sure, she's going to freeze under scrutiny. Unlike her counterpart, she was actually able to answer questions posed instead of attacking the person who posed the question.
Understand what the public trust means. It means that you have been invested with trust to be responsible in the way you use your words, much less how you conduct yourself. And especially when you have been and then seek to be again President of the United States of America. And so I go back to, it's a crying shame. Literally, what's happening to those families, those children in that community, not to mention what is happening in terms of, look, you say you care about law enforcement resources being put into this because of these serious threats that are being issued against a community that is living a productive, good life before this happened. And spewing lies that are grounded in tropes that are age old. And look, I said it not very far from here the other day at the debate. This is not new. This is not new in terms of these tropes. This is not new in terms of where it's coming from. And, whether it is refusing to rent to people, rent to Black families, whether it is taking out a full-page ad in the New York Times against 5 innocent Black and Latino teenagers, the Central Park Five, calling for their execution, whether it is referring to the first Black president of the United States with a lie, birther lies.
And also, unlike said opponent, those tasked with the running fact checks, well, they're not quite as busy when Kamala Harris is answering questions, as opposed to being unable to take a breath when it's Trump. As you can see here, Kamala Harris accurately described Trump's racist past, in which he took out a full-page ad calling for the death penalty for the exonerated five, which, again, he was given the opportunity to apologize for in front of the world at the debate. But of course he didn't, because he's incapable of even a slither of remorse.
I think honestly, I think it's a tragedy that we have someone who wants to be president who has consistently, over the course of his career, attempted to use race to divide the American people. You know, I do believe that the vast majority of us know that we have so much more in common than what separates us, and we don't want this kind of approach that is just constantly trying to divide us, and especially by race. And let's remember how Donald Trump started. He was he owned buildings, and he was investigated because he refused to rent property to Black families. Let's remember, this is the same individual who took out a full-page ad in the New York Times calling for the execution of 5 young Black and Latino boys who were innocent, the Central Park Five. Took out a full-page ad calling for their execution. This is the same individual who spread birther lies about the first Black president of the United States. And I think the American people want better than that, want better than this, want someone who understands, as I do, I travel our country. We see in each other a friend. We see in each other a neighbor. We don't want a leader who is constantly trying to have Americans point their fingers at each other. I meet with people all the time who tell me, can we please just have discourse about how we're going to invest in the aspirations and the ambitions and the dreams of the American people? Knowing that regardless of people's color or the language their grandmother speaks, we all have the same dreams and aspirations and want a president who invests in those, not in hate and division.
And when she discussed Black women having the highest mortality rate during childbirth, also true. Compare that to what we're about to see again at another of his low-energy ramblings tonight. Endless lies, disinformation, and propaganda. Also, people like this can have something to yell at. Cheer for.
I get all choked up. Yeah, we gotta save our country. Put all this narrative bullshit aside.
Love this video? Make sure you stay up to date on the latest breaking news and all things Meidas by signing up to the MeidasTouch newsletter at MeidasTouch.com/newsletter.